The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses, nonprofits, and HR practitioners better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources needed to get HR right. For more information, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, HR and leadership experts John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian dive into the stories that matter most to you, our listeners. We have found that there is a lesson in every story. And now our host, John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian. Putting on the big show today, Chuck.
We're putting on the big show.
HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson. Every story, Chuck. How are you today, Chuck? How are we doing?
Every story. Chuck is well. Thank you for asking. I was living the last 6 months on a resort, working as the on-site HR task force director, HR director. It was fantastic. And then I did something stupid, John. I took the full-time job, and they talked me into staying. I think I shared that a couple of shows ago, but part of that deal is I can't spend the next year or so on site. I have to find a place. So I moved into an apartment here in the Florida Keys, Islamorada area. It's actually a great apartment, but I miss my Four Diamond living on a resort lifestyle. John, I got to figure out how to make dinner again. I got to clean. I got to get garbage bags and paper towels. I have to buy these things and figure out how to. I'm learning to walk again. So you want to know how I'm doing? Not good, John. Not good.
It's interesting, right? So I want to take that just for a little bit, right? I want to use that as an example because I think that happens a lot of time to new HR people, right? When they come in and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm taking over this company. I got to figure out the logistics. I got to figure out how do we do this here and right? And so I think that feeling you're having, Chuck, I think a lot of people can relate to it when they take a new role or they move into a new position or they're working for a new company. A lot of that comes with it. I think, gosh, yeah, it's crazy. I'm going to feel that in a little bit. We'll talk about that coming up soon in another episode, but yeah.
And it's all about change, managing change, dealing with change. So we're getting through it. My rhythms are a little off, but we're there. But you know what? I get to work and I'm back in the chair of HR and I'm running into things. And I want to, HR in the news last week, we talked about how employers are not putting on like years of experience required on job postings.
Yeah.
And that was a nice big news story. So I've gone back and taken a look at our job postings and I realized, why am I asking 3 to 5 years, 2 to 3 years, 5 to 7 years? Because I got to tell you, I don't think any of the people that apply for these jobs ever read the requirements. They just apply.
Yeah.
And I'm not sitting there counting up the years of experience. I look, do they have the experience? Have they been doing the job for a general amount of time? And there are a lot of people that applied that don't even look at that 2 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years. So I think there's a point there that why are we even putting that as an extra line on the job postings? If someone has done the job, they've done it at a decent enough place, they have the skills and the knowledge needed, I don't think I need to count the years of experience anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, right? Because the years of experience can be misleading, right? And I think we looked at that historically. We looked at it because, the more years of experience, the more situations they've run into, the more things they've done. So they're going to be able to relate, And nowadays, it really depends on the atmosphere or the situation or the environment in which they were working. I can think back to, let me go back to my theater days, right? And so I've worked with a lot of different individuals in the scenic department, right? And so some people worked in one theater and that's all they worked at. And then other people had worked in many different theaters. And even though the time frame was the same, I think the people that had worked in many different theaters would have more different experiences, more diverse things, and would bring more to the table. So maybe not years, but the type of experience is probably important as
Yes,
you're interviewing for people.
I agree with you. So that's kind of my throwback into the news segment. And I'm sure there's HR people out there saying, "Oh my gosh, you have to have that on the job posting." Just like there's probably some HR people out there saying, "Oh my gosh, you have to do performance reviews." But that's for a little later in our HR Stories podcast. Just a little badoom, kind of
A
a
tease.
pre transition. Yes, a tease.
A
So you
tease,
got
yeah.
anything news wise today, John?
Yeah, so I've been reading, right? So I kind of like to read what's going on in the business world. And so Emily Stewart, a business insider, she wrote a really interesting article about why fewer young men in America are working, right? Why is that there? What's happening? And one factor she discussed in the article was that unemployment insurance. The reason that many young men are not being hired was because unemployment insurance. And she goes, look, employers' cost of UI, unemployment insurance, is based on an experience rating, meaning how many people have your company laid off. The more people you've laid off, whether you terminated, fired them, or literally laid them off, probably the higher your unemployment insurance is going to be, right? And so they got to pay attention to this. And so there was a paper that she cited that says, look, this hurts young men as companies are less likely to hire them because of the risk involved. Now, I don't know about you, Chuck, but I just haven't really seen any evidence of companies going, oh, we can't hire young men because of the unemployment insurance, right? I haven't seen that. However, I do believe younger men are more likely to drop out of college and maybe less responsible than their female counterparts, right? And so some people are going to look to that and go, do I want to? I have two candidates, one male, one female. They're both the same age. They both have the same type of experience. They may say, well, men don't mature as fast. They may be less responsible. But here's what's happened, right? The rate of men working has dropped from 95% in the 1960s to this past April, it's now at 86%.
Wow.
And so
Okay.
I think there are probably other reasons for this, i.e., more men staying home with the kids, fewer opportunities for the undereducated worker as a whole, and probably many others. But I would love to kind of get your take on that, Chuck. What do you think when you hear that article? And this was a big
Yeah.
research paper and studies and that kind of stuff that she was citing.
I don't know. Hi, Emily. How are you doing? I think your conjecture is way off here. I mean, I here's immediately I think of I've been through Europe, twice in the last 7-8 months. I've traveled all over the country, traveled all over this state. 90% of my Uber drivers, 95 are young men. Most of the DoorDash people that I've seen are young men. Okay, I think that they're working, but they're not working in traditional jobs. That's the first thing. The next thing I'm going to say, and folks, we won't identify you, we will keep you anonymous, we will protect your identity. But I put a call out on our thousands of listeners. If you are not hiring young men because you're afraid that your unemployment insurance is going to go up, just reach out and let us know. So I'm telling you, maybe I should say I'll pay $100 to people that I can verify that are doing that, because I'm not saying I would, but I really, I have not heard that. I've not seen that. I've not seen it whispered in the hallways of, of business. Corporate
Yeah.
America. That's the craziest theory I've ever heard. However, you cannot argue with the statistics. And I get that, but I think it has nothing to do with unemployment insurance. I never even thought of that, although it is interesting.
Yeah.
So there you go.
And
You
I
wanted my
just I
opinion.
just want you to know, Emily did not come up with this. She was reporting about a paper that had come out
Oh, okay.
about it, right? And so she was just reporting on it that this paper said blah blah blah. And so, again, it's one of these things. Somebody gets an idea in their head and they want to see this, and the purpose behind the article was they were saying that this experience rating should be removed from unemployment insurance, and there should be a flat tax, right? There should be just a tax. Everyone pays the same no matter what, so it doesn't influence people. So,
well,
I think, again, it's a stretch. I don't know if anybody's making that in there.
I do understand the experience rating, and just so for our newer listeners, that is true. So when people leave, that's where the 90 days came in, by the way, John, in a lot of places. Here in Florida, for example, if someone is employed and they leave in the first 90 days, fired or resign or really terminated, you don't get hit for their unemployment insurance. You don't get hit for that. Right. So that's why a lot of companies hold that 90-day type of thing. And you're right. If you churn through a lot of people, you pay high unemployment insurance. But here's the deal. I'm sorry to say this, but I answer every claim. I shouldn't say fight. So a lot of times companies just, when they get an unemployment claim, they just blow it off. I answer it. I send in the documentation, and maybe, 20 or 30% of the time, the unemployment is dropped. I don't even get charged. The person doesn't get it. So, the key is better unemployment management. If you do lay people off, if you do terminate people, but I don't know. Anyways, interesting theories.
I think that's an interesting. I think that's interesting, like kind of that perspective of unemployment insurance, and again, paying attention to it and your rates and all that kind of stuff. But I do think, I did work for a company that we rarely did we fight an unemployment insurance. We just very rarely fought it. It just wasn't worth the effort. We probably sent in documentation, but if they're like, no, we disagree, we weren't sending our lawyers after them. It just wasn't worth it. But and so that's interesting. Just reading the articles out there, just putting it out, so.
Absolutely. Hey, I know you got something else that I kind of teased at. If you want to go for it, I actually, the only other story I had was a throwback to AI again. Maybe I'll just throw that out. It was ACLU is suing a group called Aon because they feel that their employment assessment tools are biased, and they're saying the questions they ask in these tools will lead AI to screen out people with autism, and it goes on and on and on. Oh. But it's interesting, and I have an example here where because they say it does screen out and will screen out people with autism or other mental disabilities that are structurally prone to perform poorly on these assessments. In other words, I know some people that have autism on the spectrum or so, and when I looked at this question, and they might make great workers. My nephew, right. Zach is a great employee, and he's gonna be going to college, and he's got autism, and I could see him answering to this question. Here's the question. It says, it's about reading people's emotions. I have difficulty determining how someone feels by looking at their face. And having a hard time reading people's faces is closely associated with autism. Another thing associated with autism, by the way, is honesty, right? My my nephew Zach, my buddy Henry, his son, would answer. Victor would answer these questions to be like, yes, I have trouble. They would be very honest. They might get screened out, but they might be good workers. So I just think it's really interesting. First of all, I think it's a goofy question, but anyway, so the ACLU is suing primarily because Aon markets these as free from bias and discrimination, and they're saying that is not true. So the AI bias conversation, John, continues to march along.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I think, again, if you're not paying attention to it, you should. And there's a lot of classes out there that are definitely worth taking. I saw somebody I think it was in our Facebook group, and they were talking about it was an AI program, but it allowed him to create an app for his team members to use, where they could go in there, and it's, again, simple, but it helped him create an app where they could be like, I need help on benefits, or I need that, right? And so they would be places for them to go to get more information. And so it was a system, or an AI type system, that would help them answer some of those questions. So really kind of just more and more, this is going to be prevalent in the human resources field. We cannot deny it. I think you should be researching it, not you, Chuck, but I think our listeners should be definitely paying attention. Do not try to ignore it. It's coming to help you in the future, for sure.
There you go.
So,
John, you want to do your last story?
My topic.
That I kind of teased?
Yeah, my topic, it's really not a story, right? It's more of a question.
Yes.
And so I'm having a crisis identity. No, I'm thinking about a lot lately, because, Chuck, I spend a lot of time thinking about performance at work, right? And I'm thinking about, how do we help employees get better in the workplace? And I do a lot of training around that. I write articles about it, and I'm trying to kind of think about that. And the one thing that keeps circling around to me is the performance evaluation, in particular the annual performance evaluation. And the more I think about it, the more I research it, I just think that in terms of employees' effectiveness, it doesn't do anything. And so I love to get your opinion. What do you think? I'd be more than happy to discuss it, argue, debate with you. I don't know. I do have a clear opinion, but I'll get yours first, and then I'll tell you what.
So I love employee performance reviews said no one, never, nowhere, except the OD, organizational development geeks, Dr. So-and-so, Dr. Scratch and Sniff from the Animaniacs, or Dr. Victor, whatever. Yes. They may have said we love it. And the companies that develop them. But there is no manager. Now, that doesn't mean that HR people and managers say they may be useful, or, oh my gosh, we have to use them. But no one loves them. No one loves doing them. No one loves reading them. No one loves auditing them. No one loves delivering them. And definitely no one loves receiving them. And when it's performance review time in every company I've worked for, it takes a lot of emotional and mental toll, and it takes away from dealing with the business and also treating our employees, dealing with our employees and dealing with their issues and their problems and things like that. So I would get rid of performance reviews. And in fact, I have. In the past, I worked for a company. I remember they took us over. They're from California. They said, we're not going to do performance reviews. I'm like, what? I was like, oh my goodness. You have to do them. They're like, we don't do them. They're like, no, dude, it's all right, And I'm like, Okay. And let me tell you what, it was the best thing ever because I had an HR manager, literally half his job was running around tracking down managers to give their performance reviews. And
Yeah.
it was the best thing ever. And guess what happened? The next 2 years I was with that company, nothing. We still rewarded people. We still terminated people. We still hired people. We advanced. People got promotions, and there were no problems. Best thing ever, hands down. Drop the mic.
Yeah,
What do you think?
and so I agree. I agree that they're not an effective tool to improve employees' performance. However, I will say there is something to be said of having that documentation, right? Because
Right.
if I'm a company and I'm being sued for racial discrimination and I don't have any documentation of how I'm treating that employee or why I'm firing that employee and I'm just terminating them, that's a problem, right? And
Yeah.
so I do think the basis of it is to protect the organization, and they do that. However, I think there's better ways to protect the organization, and I think it's monthly coaching sessions. I think it's captured monthly coaching sessions where the manager and the employer are talking about, hey, this is what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. All right, let's just capture this down. So we've had this conversation. I'm going to tell you how your performance is. You're going to tell me what you're going to do to get better, right? And so they're having that's captured, it's documented. So if there is ever a thing, you can go to it. Monthly coaching sessions definitely helps employees improve. Hands down.
Okay. So there you go. So eloquently put.
Yeah.
So eloquently put. And if you know anyone that can help companies put those coaching sessions together, John, why don't you let us all know someday?
I know somebody that could do that. His name is John Tallheimer.
John T. Tallheimer, the performance expert. We're talking to him.
Yeah, I mean, I love doing it. I love teaching people how to coach people. I love teaching people how to be coachable. Right? That's the big new thing for me is I want to teach everyone how to be coachable. It's a skill that we need to learn. And so how do we become coachable? How do we do performance reviews? In fact, the company, both you and I worked for this company. We did consulting for them. I did create a performance management system for them. But in the performance reviews, what we did is we didn't do any points. There was not a 1 to 5. There wasn't exceeds or meets. Well, there was kind of exceeds or meets. We wrote their job description in the form and said, are they doing their job? And if they were, great. If they were doing above expectations, we had a little plus. If they were doing it below, we had a minus. They explained those for the employee to know. And it was so much simpler. And I think the managers really liked it. And so something to kind of think about there anyway. So I want to get into our main story, right, Chuck? Because I know that was important, but I do want to get into our main story.
Lot today. We talked a lot already about some great stuff. So yeah, let's get moving to that story.
Yeah. And so I want to talk about heat. Today at 5 p.m. here in Nashville, it was 90 degrees outside. So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 33% of employees work outside. That's including cement masons, construction workers, firefighters, roofer, highway maintenance workers, agriculture workers. And last year was the hottest summer on record.
Wow.
So get that water, get hydrated there. Right? And so we have to think about what happens when those two things are coming together. And it's something that we should be always thinking about, right? We should all be thinking about that. So let's do this. Let's take a break. And I'm going to share some stories ripped from the headlines, as Chuck likes to say, about heat and work issues.
Excellent. This has been the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story.
Hi, it's me, John, from the team at HR Stories. We are often asked, how do I get better at HR? The simple answer is by practicing it. But as with most things in life, it isn't that easy. We make the best HR decisions when we have the knowledge, the systems, and guidance in place. Chuck and I founded the team at HR Stories to help HR practitioners get HR right. We are passionate about giving you the tools to excel at your job. For more information about upcoming workshops, resources, and our latest blogs, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Together, we are the team at HR Stories.
You've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. And, well, we've had a couple of doozy question and answers and some stories there, but we've got a good one because before the break, John, you talked about high temperatures in the workplace. And, when I worked in Orlando, I worked in theme parks, I worked in operations, I was outside all the time, had to pay attention to the temperature. And when I managed, not only for myself, but when we managed employees and their shifts, ensure they didn't get overheated, made sure we had umbrellas, made sure we had enough breaks, made sure they had water. We would do actual electrolyte Gatorade crystals and mix it in the water for them. Make sure they had, I say extra breaks, but extra breaks and things like that for when they worked outside. But I know you were talking about outdoors, but what about people indoors, indoor workers?
Yeah, right. And so, heat impacts indoor workers there. I think we probably had these conversations, but back in the day, right, I worked in theater, and in a lot of the shops I worked in, they weren't air conditioned. And so during the summer month, it would get very hot, and we were working and we were moving around. We were building sets and hammering and sawing and doing all that stuff. And so we would always try to increase our work breaks. We would drink more workers, and then more water. And then if worse came to worse, we would go into office land, right? We call it office land, to cool off because they had air conditioning, right? And so we'd have these sweaty workers standing around in the cool, trying to get into the break room, trying to cool off because it was so hot. And there was days that we had to work outside, which is even worse, right? It was beating down and doing that as well.
Yeah. No, it's funny. Luckily for the places I worked in, the theme parks, we had rotations. So they'd be outside and they might rotate to an inside or into a shady area. Your custodial folks would be outside, but they could go inside. Like this is a great time. They'd always be cleaning the bathrooms, right? Cleaning bathrooms. Oh, the air conditioning in the bathrooms, so, but, down here, now I'm in the Florida Keys and, it is hot to the point that some of our jobs are outside. Like we have a hostess stand that's outside. It's covered, but sometimes the breeze isn't getting there. So we have a lot of fans and blowing, little floor fans. These little powerful, they're like floor fans, like you maybe to dry a floor, but they're compact and they blow on people. And I've seen just like in football stadiums, right? When football starts in August and September, it's hot. And they have these big, they're not air conditioners, but these big condenser fans back there. But
and then they have the misters too.
And the misters. So anytime you have a chance to cool off, find a reason to go into the offices. Oh, I got to deliver something. We're going to do that like you all used to do.
Yeah, you have to, right? Again, we want to pay attention. I was reading this article about Amazon warehouses not being air conditioned at all. The Morning Call, which is a newspaper, it's the hometown newspaper of Allentown, Pennsylvania. They did a story about an Amazon warehouse that was reaching over 110 degrees inside the warehouse. And it was so bad that Amazon had ambulances standing by to deal with heat exhaustion and other illnesses, right? They was just standing by.
Yeah, I can't imagine working in a place like that, being a manager over people in HR. It screams, we don't care about you.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is, right after the article came out, Amazon did add air conditioning to the warehouse, and so that's great, right? So they're taking care of it, they're doing it, and I know not every Amazon warehouse. Don't write in or don't call us. I know not every Amazon warehouse has it, and it's an issue, needs to be addressed. I know that in some places they are definitely working on it, but I read, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Chuck, 30 workers die each year from the heat. But when we talk to worker advocate groups, they're like, that number is so low, it's not that high. They believe that there's 170,000 on the job injuries related to heat due to workers who have heat stress making mistakes on the job. They were talking about a situation where an employee would get so heat stress that they would get dizzy and they were operating a forklift and they would run into something, right? And so we have to be paying attention about this.
Holy heck. So clarify for me, like issues there are when a person has to work in such bad conditions.
Yeah, think about temperature, right? And so room temperature is about 72 degrees. And so we've had situations, right, that are cold temperatures where the employees can experience hypothermia, frostbite, and that's really about the body losing heat, right? Is not having enough, and it usually occurs when long exposures to cold temperature, right? So in that time frame.
Yeah, sure. So two extremes, one of which we are probably not worried about right now regarding the cold.
Yeah, unless somebody stuffs you into a walk-in freezer in your kitchen, then you're probably okay.
There you go.
The other side is heat illness, right? Which is caused when the body is exposed to high temperatures and high humidity levels. And this can happen inside and outside.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I know, like I said, living in Central Florida, you walk outside, it's highly hot, highly humid, and you start sweating like crazy. I've seen it, but I want you to tell our listeners, what are the most common heat illnesses?
Yeah, so there are four major ones, right? There's heat rash, right? Sometimes called prickly heat, which we've all experienced at some time in our life, right? It's just that the body rubbing, it's get red because we've been outside, right? And so that's one. Heat cramps or painful muscle spasms. We see this happens, and you were talking about the NFL players in August, or the baseball players. They're out there in the heat and their muscles just spasm, and it causes a lot of pain. And then there's heat exhaustion, which typically shows up with heavy sweating, a fast and weak pulse, and rapid breathing. And then finally, heat stroke, right? Which is life-threatening illness, which happens when your body temperature rises above 106 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's when you've just been exposed to too much heat and your body just can't cool itself anymore.
Sure. And I've seen guests and visitors in the theme parks in Orlando dealing with this, and I'm sure what they're doing and not doing increases their risk of getting these heat illnesses, correct?
Yeah, right. And so again, when we look at the different factors of heat illness, right, the number one is dehydration, right? Not having enough water in our body. And it kind of reminds me, I remember back in the day, we were hiking in the mountains of Maine. It was myself, a friend of mine, and her dog. And I was dehydrated, and I started feeling a little heat exhaustion, I was getting dizzy, I was getting there. And luckily we made it down to the bottom of the mountain and we were able to find water, and it was kind of yucky. And so it was really interesting, Chuck. I was doing training at a concrete company, and in the bathroom, there was a chart showing one's level of hydration based on the color of their urine.
Mm-hmm. That's like weird.
But
I guess it's important. Weird. I guess it's important. It's important. No, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's effective, right?
It is. Now that I think about it, okay, I get it. Yeah. Okay. Gross, but I get it.
Yeah. Right. But it's effective, right? And so again, dehydration is a number one issue. Other factors include poor physical fitness. Certain prescription drugs can cause dehydration and illness. Illnesses, the type of clothing needed for the job, the age of the person, all of that are really factors to be paying attention to.
Yeah. And so to our listeners, if you have to repeat this episode, but if you know anyone that works outside for long periods of time, you should make sure they know what factors could cause issues. And if you're not sure, check with your health provider also.
Yeah, and I think that's really good advice, Chuck. I mean, thank you for putting that out there, because you should know, right? If you have to work outside, or you have a family member that has to work outside, you need to know what it are. We know right now, as we speak, there's a heat wave hitting the West Coast and the Western states. And so we're going to hear temperatures of 110, 112, 118. We need to be paying attention to that.
The heat dome.
So today's story comes from an OSHA report and a news article by Columbia Journalist Investigations and the Texas Newsroom. And so I want to give a warning to our listeners. This story does contain a death of an employee. So Carl Simmons was retired Navy. His job had been to work to secure aircraft that landed on the deck of this aircraft carrier, right? So he was in charge of making sure those planes were tied down after they came in. At times, the temperatures reached over 100 degrees, and probably at times went really cold, but we're talking about heat. So he knew how to deal with the heat with proper support.
Okay. So there's a key phrase here I think you are hitting on: with proper support.
Yeah, just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this story. So on July 7th, 2018, it was Carl's second day on the job with Hellis Construction. He was assigned to patch the soccer field at Gateway Park in Fort Worth, Texas. When the day started, relatively cool, was in the high 60s. But by mid-afternoon, the temperature had reached 99 degrees, and with the humidity, it felt like 118 degrees. He and his coworkers had been tasked with patching the field with a mixture of glue, gravel, and rubber.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So I can't, imagine working out in the heat in a field without any type of umbrella. And I got to tell you, my experience working in the heat, it's not easy. It's not easy. And doing manual work, John, like this has to be even doubly hard. So
yeah, and when you think about a soccer field, right, Chuck? You think about a soccer field, there's not going to be shade there. There's not, right? And so again, bringing shade is important. So, right, and so Carl had a reaction to this, right? He told his boss he was feeling sick in the afternoon. So he sought shade in the work van after being given a break. Now, let's talk about this, right? Going into a car, going into a van on a really hot day, even when the doors open, is probably not your best choice, right? And so the team had run out of water and Gatorade. So the supervisor did what you do. He took the van and ran to the local Walmart store to restock, right? He was going to bring all that back. In the meantime, Carl, who now sat under the tree, wasn't getting any better. So a passerby walks by and sees Carl convulsing under the tree and calls the coworkers that were working nearby to come over and help. He was unresponsive at this time. By the time they got him to his hospital, his body temperature had registered 107.1 degrees. Now, remember when I talked about heat stress, right? The temperature was 106, right? That was the definition of it. Unfortunately, he died in the hospital a few hours later.
I have to tell you, right when the employee said, "Hey, boss, I'm feeling sick," they should have taken action right then. And that's been my experience right away. Sit down, get some ice on your head. I know we're in the middle of a field, or a soccer field. There's got to be restrooms. Go splash your face, hose your, these things you do. But it's too late now. I get it. But what did the company do after this?
Yeah, and so there wasn't any management on site. There was no plan. There was no before the day begins, here's what you need to do. Remember, it was the second day on the job. He hadn't been fully oriented to dealing with the heat. He hadn't gotten there, right? And so the second was the general superintendent or their safety officer arrived, but it was 2 days after Carl had died. He took photographs of the scene. He interviewed the coworkers. But after interviewing the coworkers, he shredded his notes, which then under oath, he testified that those notes probably would have helped OSHA in their investigation, right?
Yeah.
And so
it's kind of odd.
doing that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just sitting there thinking, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it sounds so odd that he waited 2 days to investigate. And as you know, and we tell our students in our classes and our clients and coworkers, investigations should happen immediately so you can make sure you're getting all the right information.
No, I agree. And when I read that, it just kind of stood out to me. 2 days? Now, obviously, they notified OSHA, but no one came out to check the work environment to see what it was like. And so really kind of doing that really kind of stood out to me as well.
Okay. So it sounds like maybe the company didn't even cooperate with OSHA that well either, right? Maybe?
Well, they did the minimum to stay legal, right?
Okay.
They did enough.
Gotcha. So what ended up happening to the company?
Well, let me read from the article from the Columbian Journalist investigation. They said this: OSHA cited Hellas, the company, for 2 violations in connection with Simmons' death and proposed a fine of $14,782, about $3,000 more than the average for a worker death in Texas.
Wow. Ouch. I mean, it's only 14,000. I mean, I would imagine there might be some civil lawsuits from the family, but ouch in regards to what you just shared.
Yeah, I didn't see any records of that. That doesn't mean that happened. It doesn't mean that wasn't settled out of court. I don't know, but it wasn't there. And this is why when you talk to worker advocates, they're pushing for laws regarding outside and inside environmental conditions to protect employees. Hollis Construction also said it would launch an acclimatization program for new employees, provide training on dangerous of heat illness, and ensure crews had ample water and cool rest areas.
Wow. Did they follow that? Did they follow through?
Well, not according to this article, right? Another employee died a year later.
Oh, geez. Sorry. Okay. What are the lessons in this story?
Protect your employees from heat stress and heat exhaustion.
All right. How can we do
simple
this
as that,
well?
right?
Yeah, I gotcha. So if you had to summarize it, how can we do it well?
All right. So I got a list of things. I'm not going to summarize. I got a list of things that I would recommend people do, right? So number 1, provide adequate training. Right? Train your employees on recognizing the sign of heat stress, exhaustion, and educate them on the importance of staying hydrated and taking breaks in the shade or cool area. And making sure your supervisors know those rules as well. And you said earlier, which I think is good, implement work rest cycles, right? And so moving people into air conditioned areas, into the shade areas, not making people have to work out on the sun, rotate them into other places. And adjust workloads and schedules. So I know when I was doing scenic construction, there were days that we had to be working outside. And our boss would give us a call at 4 a.m. in the morning. Not give us a call, but our time to show up would be at 4 a.m. versus 9 a.m. because we wanted to work, and we would get done like 12 or 1 before it got really hot. Or we would come back, like we would work till 12 and then we'd come back after 7 when it's cool, right? So kind of doing that, provide access to water, right? There needs to be water there. I know I've said this on the show, but I worked at the company called QVC, and we used to have crews outside when we were doing live broadcasting outside, and we would always make sure there was water. And then we'd also give them those frozen ice cream pops, you get in the things. So they would be there, right? So they could cool them off. They could rotate in and out, making sure that, as you said, using engineering controls, so fans, misters, air conditioning, whatever you can do. You have to communicate it, right? Communicate, promote it, reward people for doing heat practices, making sure we're paying attention to that. Monitoring weather conditions. So if you know it's going to be 112 degrees for a couple of days, can you do something inside? Can the crews do something else? Making sure that you're doing that. Make sure you have a heat stress management plan. Providing first aid. So each truck should be out there. They should have a heat blankets. They should have everything they need to support somebody that's having an emergency. And then open communication. So if an employee's complaining about it, it's acted on. Right. And so I think that's where it fails a lot of times. An employee will go to the manager. The manager has all this pressure on them to get things done and pushes their employees a little bit more. That's when we need this open communication. We really need to get in there and do that.
Yeah, that's an amazing list. It sounds like we could add it to our updated checklist book, which will be coming out this fall. Maybe we can do one for cold temperatures as well.
Taking a note, right? Yeah, I'm doing that. I'm taking a note. I definitely think about how do we do that as a checklist for sure.
Yeah, and this is great. I got to tell you, it's not getting any cooler. Just on the news today, they're talking about that heat dome that's affecting the far west. It's hotter now than it was in the, for end of May, beginning of June, when, about the time we're recording this podcast. I mean, we're well into June now, but, even in June it was getting hot. Down here in the Florida Keys, the coral is starting to bleach out and die from the warm oceans because of the warm temperatures. And it doesn't matter whether you, where your stance is on any type of causes for any climate change or warming. It is happening. It is hotter out there than normal. And folks, you are listening to the HR Stories podcast, where we bring you these stories and we relate these things to the workplace. And not only do we produce this podcast, we also offer training on leadership and HR topics to help organizations improve. We've got a Facebook page, the HR Team of One Facebook group, and you can contact us, email at team@hrstories.com. Notes below, you can read them, and, well, we'd be happy to provide you with a customized quote for training in person or virtually.
Thanks for listening. There's a lesson in every story. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.